Okay, so this week we are moving on to the last type of analysis, analyzing qualitative research and mixed methods research. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about qualitative analysis. So these are methods for analyzing data that were collected from interviews, focus groups, observations, or any type of qualitative data, even documents or images. So the first concept that the authors talk about is interim analysis. So in qualitative research, one benefit is that researchers, since they're in the field, they're able to iteratively collect data, analyze, and then collect more. So the analytic process is really tied to the data collection process. While they're oftentimes separate phases, the researchers are doing initial analysis while they're collecting data. That's just in many ways how the brain works. While you're doing an interview, you're starting to notice and think about the themes that you're hearing come through. And then the author might write a memo after each interview or after each observation. So memos are notes, researcher notes that they make throughout the data collection process that are part of the analysis as well. So in the memos, researchers are writing down what they notice, any connections that they are seeing, any initial types of analytic ideas that are coming through. And then when they go back and they do their end of, once they've collected all the data, they'll go back and include those memos in their analysis as well. So the first thing that researchers need to do is they need to transcribe their data. So if they've collected interviews or focus groups, they need to take those audio or video files and have them transcribed into text that can be analyzed. So this used to be something that was done by hand, very tedious process, but now with technology, it's very automated. And so it's much quicker to transcribe large amounts of qualitative data. So once the transcripts are ready to analyze, researchers engage most oftenly with what's known as coding. And there are many different approaches to coding based on the research question, the research approach that the authors are using. And in this chapter, in our text, they talk about several different kinds and also the different phases. So they talk about inductive code. So an inductive code is a code where the researcher will read either one line of the transcript or a chunk, a paragraph, a couple sentences to a paragraph, and assign a meaningful code based on their own synthesis. So you can think of it kind of like a hashtag on Twitter, coming up with a way to assign meaning to a chunk of data. So that is an inductive code. Now, other times, researchers, when they're coding, they use what's called in vivo codes. In vivo codes is when they use an actual piece of text from the data. So the code comes directly from the data. Like, for instance, if you're interviewing a teacher and they said something like, building relationships with my students is really important. They might take that word relationships and like importance and say importance of relationships. And it's coming directly from the quote. So an inductive quote is when the researcher is assigning meaning. In vivo is when you take the actual words that the participant said and shorten it and make that the code. And then the last type that they talk about in this chapter is a priori codes. That's when the researchers, before they analyze the data, they make a list of codes, maybe like relationships, maybe like social emotional learning. They make a list of codes that they're going to be looking for. And then when they go through and they read the data, every time they see that, they assign that code. So those are the three main types of codes that you'll see in this chapter. Of course, there's many more that you will see when you are doing your qualitative article critique this week. So researchers, as they are doing this analysis process, they're going to keep a code list, this master list of all the codes in the data. And in this chapter, they also talk about how they call it a fact sheet here, and how you might even do a frequency count where you start, that's this enumeration where you start to count how many times you see these ideas. They also talk about some concepts like inter-coder and intra-coder reliability. sometimes you're going to have more than one researcher working on the same project. And so when you do this, there's many different ways, but it's really important, if that's the case, that the researchers are very clear how the analytic process will happen when you have more than one researcher. Who will be in charge of what? How will you determine this inter-rater reliability? So they might do things like have each researcher analyze part of the data, then come back and talk about the different codes that they assigned, and then agree on some codes and finish coding the rest of the data. They might do it like that. Or if they're using a priori codes, they might discuss what each one means and do a couple practices to make sure that they are coding the data in the same way. So that's inter-coder reliability. Now, intra-coder reliability means that within the same analyzer, the same researcher, they are being reliable in applying codes consistently through all of the data that they are coding. And so, as you can imagine, this analytic process for qualitative research is much more time consuming than quantitative research, where you're able to use a computer program, you enter the data, it will do the calculations for you. With qualitative research, you're going line by line with all of the transcripts, assigning codes, going back. That's your initial coding, going back, assigning meaning to secondary codes, finding categories. And in this chapter, they talked about some different approaches, the hierarchical theming, different ways that they can get the overarching ideas and themes through the coding process. So that is what you will read about in chapter 20. And this is what I was talking about. So once the researchers have done their initial coding, assigned codes to all of them, now the secondary and the theming process is focused on finding relationships between those codes, grouping the like ideas together, maybe cause and effect, rationale. The chapter talks about some different relationships that qualitative researchers might find between codes and the data, making diagrams or other visualizations, or even a hierarchical relationship between them. So once qualitative researchers have done their initial coding and found the relationships in their overall theming, they're ready to write their report, which is what you're going to be reading this week. And so in the results section of qualitative research, you should expect to see maybe there might be 3 to 5 themes. And so when the authors write about those themes, they will use quotes from the data to show you what that looked like. So if you coded, like just to use the relationships example, if you coded 3 teacher interviews, and one of the themes was the importance of relationships, you would have all those different data segments that were coded as relationships to pull from. And again, I do think Twitter is the best example for this because of Twitter, we're very used to hashtags and how you can search by hashtags. So that is very similar to the process that qualitative researchers go through within their own analysis process. So most qualitative, well, I don't know about most. I mean, I know that I use a computer program that they talk about this in the chapter as well. So I have a data analysis program that I use to analyze my data and to organize it. You know what, let me pull it up and show it to you since I'm talking about it here. Okay, this is a little example. This is in vivo. And so I've shared about the belt line. So this is an article from the AJC that I analyzed as part of my dissertation. So this would be an example of archival research because this is a document that already existed. So over here, you can see some of the different parts of the software. You can see codes. So here, data, this is where you upload all of your data files. It could be transcripts, documents, images, whatever you're analyzing. And then the codes, this organizes the different codes that you do. So once you upload your document, you start reading through, you highlight text, and you assign codes. So here, like, let's say I wanted to code this dispute, that would be an example of an in vivo code because it comes straight from the data. So I can do that. Did I show that here? So here you can see, it looks like I did assign a code here to this one called battle mode, again, an in vivo code. So once you do that, you have that code here. And then once you have analyze multiple data. You can see here, I have a list of different codes that have come up. And then once you're done with initial coding, you can start to merge them together. So you can see here, I have some sub themes as I'm organizing and going through that process to collapse the codes and group them together to show those relationships. So for instance, dispute, so battle mode and divisive, those kind of go together. And there is a relationship there. Okay, so let me go back to our other screen. Okay, so that is an example of how you can use software to analyze data. So I wanted to show you another example. I know that we've talked a lot about Gloria Ladson Billings, Dream Keepers, that resulted in culturally relevant pedagogy. I wanted to show you from her methodology section where she talked about her qualitative analytic process. So here she's talking about her teacher interviews. I know a lot of you in your research proposal have talked about including interviews. If you're going to include interviews in your research proposal, make sure you include under the instrument section your interview protocol. And this is a list of questions that you would ask participants. So here you can see these are a list of questions that Gloria Ladson Billings asked the participants in her study. All about their perception, how do you handle discipline, for instance. And so then she talked about how she analyzed the data. Of course, the interviews were taped and transcribed. This happened a long time ago. So actually tape, not the type of technology we use now. And then this is something that we've talked about as well. Teachers were given a copy of their transcript and asked to check for errors. So getting the consensus of the participants. Then they were coded using, she used a different computer program to look for keywords and phrases, then hand coded searching for themes related to pedagogy and culture. And then she said through this coding process, I was able to arrive at the inductive model of culturally relevant teaching. So that is just an example with something that most of us are familiar with, how she used qualitative research and analysis to come up with this theory that many of us use in our classrooms. Okay, and so then the next part of our chapter is about mixed methods analysis. And so mixed methods analysis, of course, has to use both quantitative analytic methods and qualitative analytic methods. And so thinking about what type of data do you have, monodata, which is just one type, or multi-data, which is more than one type. How many different approaches, and then based on that, how you can go through the process. So here are some of the key modes and strategies that are available for mixed methods. So data reduction, trying to reduce the different types of data. Data transformation, maybe going from qualitative to quantitative or vice versa, finding a correlation between the different types, consolidation, creating a new set of data based on them, comparing, and then also integration. So I am going to pause. I want to show you an example of what this looks like in a study. Okay, so this is a paper that is about the mixed methods analytic process in an example of doing a focus group with children. So they talk a little bit about, so in this, it was focus groups with some children to look at basically how they engage with each other in conversation. So this paper is really detailed in talking about how to analyze mixed methods data. So here you can see they have the focus group data. This one is also really unique because it's concurrent. In most of the examples that we've talked about, it's concurrent in terms of it might be a test score and interviews that are collected around the same time. In this one, it was a focus group. So they had a group of students, of children, and they observed how the children talked to each other and interacted with each other. And through that one experience, they analyzed it both with a quantitative approach and a qualitative approach. So this one's a little bit different in that there's not qualitative data and quantitative data, but using this approach within one setting. So for the qualitative part, they were focused on the content of what children were saying to each other. And then in the quantitative, they were doing things like word counts, how often was each child speaking, how often were certain words spoken, how often were there pauses. And then they had this transformation strand, thinking about who talked to who. So you can see there's the qualitative, the quantitative, and then the interaction portion, which is this transformation. So you can see here they have like the linkage, and then consolidation, and then how this is kind of like the data reduction, how they went from the focus group and then they reduced that to discrete portions. And then here you can see they had age specific considerations that they had for them. So you see in here frequencies, they had an interaction matrix. I'm about to show you some of those. And then for the qualitative portion, they would characterize the different statements that they were making. So here you can see they talked about data reduction, how to take the overall data and reduce it into the different types. So here you can see this is a frequency count. So this would be a quantitative example of the different word counts of the participant by age. And then this would be a qualitative component. You can see the coding scheme that they used. So here they have the social emotional area, they have the task area, questions like, so these are positive, these are negative. And then over here, you can see how they have done all of these different parts and how they have created, these are more a priori codes that they were looking for when they analyzed the qualitative content of what children were saying. Here you can see more quantitative data. So you can see how different children responded, and then how they had the code. So they have a little interaction there. And then this is the transformation portion when they talked about who talked to who, the interaction. So you can see this is a visual way to represent data. So this could be used in both qualitative or mixed research to talk about. So here are the children's names. You can see who talked to who. It shows directionality, and then who wasn't included. And you can see data linkage. So these are data consolidation, all of these different terms that we used in this chapter. So I'm going to link this article if you would like to take a look. This is from the authors of our text. Mentioned this article as well. So if you want to take a look at what some of these concepts look like in practice, you can take a closer look there. So that is qualitative and mixed methods analysis. So you'll need this both for the article critique this week and then for your research proposal.